I was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. My wife, Karen, was in the kitchen, humming as she made dinner, acting like everything was normal. But the atmosphere was thick with tension. You see, Karen's always been a woman of routines. I've been married to her for over 15 years, and in that time, I've learned to read her like a book. But lately, it was as if someone had torn a few pages out. And that's what hit me. This wasn't the woman I married. A few weeks ago, she had come home late from what she called a work event. But she'd barely looked at me, too busy texting someone on her phone. It was a harmless enough detail, but I noticed that she was acting strangely excited about it, talking about new connections and opportunities. Karen wasn't a small talker. She was grounded, practical. But now she seemed to have this nervous energy that I didn't understand. And when I asked her about the event, she was vague. Nothing to worry about. Just a few of the girls from the self-care group, she said with a casual shrug. But the way she said it felt like an obvious cover-up. Something about it didn't sit right. Then it happened. That night, I was sitting there, scrolling through the sports channel, when Karen's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It was a name I didn't recognize, Cameron. I didn't even have to read the message to know this wasn't anything good. I miss you, babe. Can't wait for next weekend. I've already booked the same hotel. Let's make sure no one finds out this time. I felt my stomach churn, and my heart hit the floor. At that moment, something snapped inside me. All the little signs, all the questions that had been gnawing at me for weeks, came crashing together. This wasn't just some innocent friendship. This was an affair, a betrayal, hidden right under my nose. But I didn't react. I didn't shout, didn't confront her then and there. No, that wasn't my style. I knew I had to play this right. I had to think this through. This wasn't going to be a rash, emotional outburst. No, I had to gather the facts. I'm not a man who easily gets rattled. I've spent years as an engineer, solving problems, staying level-headed, focused on results. I've built things with my hands, fixed machines that were on the brink of failure. When you're in a position like mine, you don't let emotions cloud your judgment. You analyze. You think. You wait for the right moment to strike. Karen and I come from humble backgrounds. My folks were farmers, tough people who lived off the land, and Karen? She came from a modest family too. We didn't have much, but we made it work. We raised our kids with strong values. Honesty, loyalty, and hard work. We didn't need extravagant things. Just the basics. Family dinners on Sunday. A couple of trips every year, usually upstate or out to the cabin. Simple pleasures. But this felt like a betrayal of everything we had built. I guess I should have noticed sooner. Karen started spending more time on her laptop, especially late at night. She'd come to bed hours after me, quietly tap away at the keyboard, then slip her phone under the pillow before I could even ask what she was doing. No matter how many times I tried to bring it up, she'd shut me down, give me the old, "I'm just tired" excuse. But that didn't feel right either. I wasn't stupid. It wasn't just that, though. I started noticing her behavior changing, small things at first. She stopped being interested in the things we used to do together. A quiet walk after dinner? Suddenly, she had to catch up on emails or was meeting a friend. Family weekends? She needed her space and would head out with friends instead. A few months ago, I asked her about a weekend retreat she'd signed up for. It was something with this new online group she was part of. I didn't think anything of it at first. A weekend with a bunch of women, talking about personal growth. Fine. But when she came back, she was different. A little more distant. A little less present. I asked her how it went, and she kept saying it was good. But I could see it in her eyes. Something was off. Her new friends? They were inspirational, she said. Yet I had never met any of them. She stopped introducing me to them when they came over. I wasn't sure if it was just the normal social distancing from her old life. But again, something was off. That night, after I saw the text from Cameron, I knew I couldn't sit idly by. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. This was the turning point. The moment everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and my life came crashing down. The first time I had to face the fact that the woman I had trusted for so long was keeping secrets from me. But I wasn't going to jump to conclusions just yet. I needed to be certain. So, I made a plan. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, Karen's face, soft and innocent, just like it had been for the past 15 years. The same face I woke up to every morning, the same woman I had built my life with. But now it was all a lie. The message from Cameron kept flashing in my mind. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue or some harmless flirtation. No, this felt deliberate, premeditated, and it wasn't the first sign. I had let the little things slide. Her sudden work trips that I never questioned, the long nights at the office when she was supposedly doing overtime. But the moment I saw that message, I knew this wasn't a small mistake. This was the kind of betrayal that could ruin everything. I've never been one for unnecessary drama. Hell, I've always been the calm, patient type. I'd been through a lot in my life. Years of hard work, building a career from the ground up, raising kids, dealing with financial setbacks, illness. I wasn't one to lose my cool easily. But this was different. This was personal. I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. I had to get to the bottom of it. I had to know the truth. I waited until Karen was out the door the next morning. She kissed me, said she was off to work, and I pretended everything was normal. As soon as she left, I got to work. This wasn't my first rodeo. I'd done my fair share of investigative work in the past. It wasn't a big deal, whether it was fixing a broken system in the factory or tracking down a financial discrepancy. I knew how to dig. But this was different. This was personal. I wasn't going to play nice with the truth. I was going to expose it, no matter how painful it was for me or her. I started with her phone. Karen and I had always shared passwords, no secrets between us. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't even a thought when I unlocked it, until now. Now, it felt like I was prying into a stranger's life. I could already feel the betrayal in the air. As I scrolled through her recent texts, something hit me right away. There was a messaging app called Signal. I never heard her mention it before, and I knew it wasn't the default texting app we always used. I'd heard of it online. It was known for encrypted, private conversations. A sinking feeling washed over me, but I kept my cool. There was no turning back now. I clicked on the app. There, I saw them, long threads of conversation between Karen and Cameron, dated months back. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to read through it. No turning back now. The messages weren't just casual. They weren't simple, flirty words like I'd expected. No, these were deep, intimate conversations. Talk of weekend trips, getting a room together, stolen kisses, and the one that cut deeper than all the others. I love how you take care of me. You make me feel like I'm the only one. I had to stop for a moment. The betrayal hit hard. Not just the words, but the realization that she'd been pretending to love me while she was giving herself to someone else. It wasn't just a momentary lapse. It was an ongoing affair. It was calculated. I exhaled slowly, and though my hands trembled, I didn't let the anger take hold. I had to stay focused. I'd been betrayed, yes, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Not yet. No, I needed more than just messages on a screen. I needed to see her face when I confronted her. I needed to be able to look her in the eye and say, I know what you've been doing. For the next few days, I kept my distance. I watched. I waited. Karen was on edge, more than usual. She'd always had a habit of disappearing for work or appointments, but now she seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact, and changing the subject whenever I asked about her day. But it wasn't enough. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. I didn't let on that I knew. I kept up the pretense of normalcy, but it was killing me inside. Watching her lie to my face day in and day out, all while I knew the truth. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, but I wasn't going to jump the gun either. No, I had to make sure everything was in place. The turning point came when Karen mentioned a girls' night with her friends. I'd heard this excuse before. She would say it was just drinks or a catch-up with old friends. She never invited me, of course. Always a girls-only night. I had learned to respect her space, though now, it felt like a cover for something far darker. That night, I followed her. I kept my distance, of course, maintaining a low profile. I watched her pull into a parking lot near a high-end hotel. It wasn't somewhere she'd ever mentioned going before. My gut tightened. I parked across the street, my eyes fixed on her every move. She walked into the lobby with none other than Cameron. There was no mistaking it. They were close, too close. I saw the way he touched her back, the way she laughed at something he said. My heart skipped a beat. At that moment, I wasn't sure whether to burst in there and confront them both or drive off, but I knew this was it. The evidence was right there in front of me, plain as day. I wasn't some fool. I wasn't going to make a scene just yet. I knew Karen, and I knew she would try to talk her way out of this. She'd have an excuse ready, but I wasn't going to give her that opportunity. I waited a few more minutes in the truck, watching as they disappeared inside. I couldn't bring myself to follow them in. Not tonight, but I knew what had to happen next. This was no longer just a suspicion, it was a fact, and Karen was going to face the consequences. The next evening, Karen came home like nothing had changed. I watched her take off her coat and set her purse down on the counter, humming softly. The same routine, the same facade. I could feel the anger simmering inside me, but I didn't say a word. I just sat there at the kitchen table, watching her like a hawk. She tried to act normal, but I could see the tension in her movements. She kept glancing over at me, but she didn't say anything. I wasn't going to give her the chance to hide behind small talk. Karen, I said, my voice as cold as I could make it. We need to talk. She stopped in her tracks, her face going pale in an instant. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to act casual. What's wrong? You're scaring me. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I stood up slowly, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the phone. Her phone, the one I had been studying for the past few days. Her eyes widened as she saw it. I know, I said, my voice hard. I know about Cameron. I know what's been happening behind my back. Her face turned crimson. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She stared at me, her breathing shallow. Then, after a few seconds, she managed to speak. It's not what you think, she said quickly, her voice panicking. I swear it's not what you think. I can explain. Explain? I shot back, cutting her off. You want to explain this? I held up the phone, showing her the messages. The weekend plans, the intimate words, the lies. Her face drained of all color. She was silent for a long moment, staring at the phone. Then, she finally spoke, but the words felt hollow. It was just a mistake, she said, almost pleading. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was just so unhappy with us. You know, things haven't been the same for a while. Cameron, he made me feel seen. I had to fight to keep my cool. So, you're telling me that after everything, after all we've been through, this is your excuse? He made you feel seen? She looked down, guilt washing over her. I could see the cracks starting to form. The woman who once knew how to manipulate me, to get out of any situation with a smile, was starting to break. But it wasn't enough. I trusted you, I said, my voice low but filled with fury. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for what? A fling? A distraction? She stammered, looking for words. It wasn't like that. It's complicated. No, I said, my voice harder now. It's simple. You lied. You betrayed me. And that's unforgivable. I took a deep breath, not sure how much more of her excuses I could take. I'm done, Karen. I've seen enough. The moment Karen admitted her betrayal, the air in our home grew heavy. I could feel the weight of her words, and it took every ounce of restraint to keep my cool. The tears in her eyes were just a shield, a well-rehearsed act she thought would absolve her guilt. I'd spent years supporting her, loving her unconditionally, and this was how she repaid me. I let her talk, let her spill the lies she thought would make her seem remorseful. She thought she could undo everything with a few tearful pleas and promises. But the truth was, I was done. I wasn't some naive fool who would let her off easy. Karen had betrayed me, not once, but in the worst possible way, by lying to my face, by deceiving me, and worst of all, by letting someone else into our marriage. As she spoke, her words became a blur. The betrayal was too much to digest, but in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we had without making her understand the consequences of her actions. She kept asking for forgiveness, even suggesting we go to therapy. The audacity. The nerve to think that after what she had done, we could just move on like nothing happened. A few tears weren't going to fix this. You don't betray someone, destroy their trust, and expect to get a free pass. She was trying to salvage her image and make me believe that she could do better, that it was just a temporary mistake. But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal, a decision she made knowing the risks. And now, it was my turn to decide how this would play out. I spent the following days in a haze of rage, confusion, and clarity. I wasn't going to just leave her. No, that would be too easy for her. She didn't deserve the dignity of walking away with a clean conscience. I was going to make her understand exactly what she had done. The damage wasn't just to me. It was to everything we had built over the years. And I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of that. But I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to be the emotional wreck she wanted me to be, nor would I let her think I was weak. No, I had to be strategic. The best revenge wasn't about feeling good in the moment. It was about making her pay for every moment of this mess she had created. I wasn't going to be her victim. I was going to be the one who controlled the narrative from here on out. The first step was clear. Karen had a whole network of friends, colleagues, and family members who thought we were the picture-perfect couple. They had no idea what had been happening behind closed doors. But now they would. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Karen. It was about exposing her for the fraud she truly was. I wasn't going to do it quietly. Karen had spent years pretending to be someone she wasn't, lying to everyone, and getting away with it. Now it was time for everyone to know exactly who they were dealing with. I thought about it for a while, weighing the perfect time and place for this. And then it hit me, her mother's birthday dinner. It was a large family gathering, with her parents, siblings, cousins, and our children. A perfect stage. This wasn't going to be some casual conversation in private. I wasn't going to take Karen aside and talk to her about this. No, I was going to make sure that every single person at that table knew what kind of woman they were dealing with. I didn't care about the embarrassment. I didn't care how it would make me look. What mattered was that Karen would feel the humiliation of facing her lie in front of everyone who mattered to her. I reached out to a few of Karen's colleagues who had witnessed the affair. At first, they hesitated, unsure about getting involved, but I wasn't asking for sympathy. I just needed them to help me get the truth out. I didn't have to force them. Karen's affair wasn't some fleeting secret. It was an open one at work. There were people who knew, and now it was time for everyone else to understand that this wasn't just a mistake. This was a calculated betrayal. When the time came, I was going to stand up at that table, look Karen in the eyes, and let the world know the truth. I would tell everyone how she'd been sleeping with Cameron for months, how she had deceived me, how she had lied to our children and our families. It would be clear, no room for interpretation. I wasn't doing this for sympathy, but for justice. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed, not when the people she loved most were involved. The second part of the plan was to hit Karen where it would hurt the most, her finances. She had always relied on me to provide, to keep things running smoothly. I had worked hard to ensure that we had a comfortable life, and she had been content with that. But now she would learn that her actions came with consequences. When Karen confessed, she tried to downplay everything. It was just a mistake, she said. We weren't as close as we used to be. As if that justified her affair. No, Karen, you don't get to justify this. You don't get to pretend like this is some small issue. This wasn't a temporary mistake. It was a calculated betrayal that destroyed everything. I knew that this wasn't just about getting a divorce. It was about making sure she felt the full consequences of her actions. Karen couldn't get away with pretending like this was some small blip in an otherwise happy marriage. She didn't deserve a clean break, nor did she deserve a comfortable future with the money we had built together. I would make sure our divorce was as painful as possible for her. I contacted my lawyer and made sure everything was in order. We had joint accounts, shared investments, and property that needed to be divided. But I wasn't just going to let her walk away with half of everything. No, I was going to make sure that I fought for a settlement that left her with less than she expected. She would get what she was legally entitled to, but she wouldn't get a penny more. Not after what she had done. I wasn't going to drag the divorce out for years. I wasn't going to give her the chance to play victim. I'd make sure everything moved quickly and smoothly, with no room for her to delay the process. She didn't get the right to stall, to drag out a process that was going to be painful for both of us. It was time to make her pay. The third part of my revenge was to make sure Karen had nowhere to turn. Over the years, She had built a strong network of friends who had always supported her. They had no idea about the affair, and I wasn't going to let them stay in the dark. They needed to know the truth. If Karen thought she could run to her friends and be comforted, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her have that. I knew Karen's closest friends. They had no clue what she had been up to behind my back. I wasn't asking them to hate her. I wasn't trying to turn them against her. But they needed to know what kind of person they were dealing with. If they chose to stick by her after everything, that was on them. But they wouldn't be left in ignorance. I started reaching out to a few of her friends, carefully planting seeds of doubt. I didn't have to be overly dramatic. A few carefully worded messages, and they started to piece together the truth. I didn't want to be the victim in their eyes. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I just wanted them to see Karen for who she really was. I wasn't going to let her have the comfort of a supportive network while I sat there, left alone to deal with the fallout of her betrayal. I made sure she would feel the weight of this betrayal on all fronts, from her finances to her friendships. Throughout all of this, I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. I'd seen Karen's desperation when she tried to apologize, but I wasn't interested in her hollow words anymore. I wasn't going to let her play me, make me think that I could just forgive and forget. No, I needed to make her understand that there was no going back. I kept my distance. I didn't answer her calls or texts. When she tried to speak to me, I shut her down. There was no more pretending that things were going to be okay. She had ruined everything, and now she needed to face the consequences of that. Karen's guilt started to show. She could see the distance between us, the coldness in my eyes. It wasn't just emotional detachment. It was a message. She wasn't going to get another chance. The days of us trying to work things out, of pretending everything could go back to normal, were over. And that was exactly how I wanted it. No hope, no second chances. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I had played my cards well so far, but this was only the beginning. Karen had no idea what I had in store for her. She thought she could manipulate the situation, control the narrative, but she was wrong. The game wasn't over yet. I had one more move left, and it would be the one that changed everything. The humiliation, the financial consequences, the isolation, these were just the first steps. Karen had no idea that the worst was yet to come. I wasn't going to stop until she regretted every single choice she had made. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. And Karen was going to learn that when you betray someone like this, you don't get to walk away unscathed. Not on my watch. By the time I had wrapped my head around the enormity of what Karen had done, I was ready to take full control of the situation. Every move I made from then on was calculated, deliberate, and well thought out. I had decided to make sure Karen didn't just regret what she had done. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal. Every corner of her life would eventually be affected, but it wouldn't be some quick, impulsive act of revenge. No, this was the long game, the kind that would strip away her comfort, dignity, and the lies she'd spent years telling herself. At the start, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching Karen flail around, trying to piece together the mess she had created. She tried her usual tricks, calling me, sending messages, even going so far as to beg. But I remained firm, cold even. I could see through every one of her attempts. She didn't want to fix the marriage. She wanted to save face. And that wasn't going to happen. But now, the real work began. I'd spent a week or two letting the dust settle after the first public exposure. That disastrous birthday dinner where I had stood up and made it clear to her entire family what she had done. It wasn't just about tearing her down in front of her loved ones. It was about giving her the chance to see the destruction in her eyes, to make her realize how her actions had ruined everything she had taken for granted. I could tell it had shaken her. She was still trying to repair the damage, still clinging to the idea that things could be salvaged. It wasn't working. Now, I had my eyes on something much more strategic, financial punishment. This was the part of my plan that I knew would hit her hardest. Karen wasn't a bad person when it came to money, but she was entitled. She had always relied on me for stability. I made sure the bills were paid, the investments were growing, and the mortgage was always on time. She hadn't had to worry about money for years, and I knew she'd taken that security for granted. But now it was all about to change. The first thing I did was contact my lawyer. I had already made it clear that I wasn't interested in a quiet divorce, and I certainly wasn't interested in letting Karen walk away with half of everything. The next steps were going to make that clear. We had a joint bank account, several shared investments, and property that needed to be split. But I wasn't going to let Karen walk away with a clean slate. Over the years, I had managed to save up a good chunk of money. I'd made smart investments in real estate, stocks, and even a few small businesses that were now generating enough passive income to make me financially secure for life. Karen didn't know how much was in the savings, nor did she understand the full extent of the investments I had made. I decided to tighten the screws slowly, methodically. I began by withdrawing large sums of money from our joint account, ensuring that she'd be left with just enough to cover her daily expenses, but not enough to make any major decisions without consulting me. I also began to sell off a few smaller properties we had invested in together. I wasn't doing this out of some desire to punish her directly. I was doing it to make her realize that everything she had built around our marriage was now in jeopardy. The stability she had taken for granted was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next move was setting up separate accounts. I took my share of the finances, leaving her with what she was legally entitled to, but making sure there was no way she could manipulate the system for her own benefit. She was a smart woman, but she had no idea what was coming next. She thought she could walk away with half of everything we'd built. I was going to make sure that didn't happen. Every day after that, I made sure to track every transaction, every withdrawal. I kept her on edge, unsure of how deep the financial cuts would go. I didn't speak to her much. When I did, it was strictly business, the bills, the divorce papers, the arrangements for the kids. I didn't let her off the hook emotionally, and I wasn't going to let her wriggle out of this unscathed. She tried to accuse me of being cruel, of being heartless. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't in this for some petty revenge. I was doing this for the principle of it. She had broken our vows, and now she had to deal with the consequences of that choice. While the financial side of the plan was ongoing, I turned my attention to the social aspect. Karen had spent years building a network of friends who she thought she could lean on. She thought she could run to them for support, to find solace in the arms of people who knew nothing of her actions. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her have that luxury. I had already made sure that her closest colleagues knew the truth. They knew what she had done with Cameron, and they knew the damage it had caused. But now I needed to make sure her social network felt the ripples of her betrayal as well. If she thought she could count on anyone, I was going to make sure that everyone in her life knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I reached out to a few of her closest friends, the ones she thought she could trust with her secrets. I made sure they knew exactly what had been going on behind closed doors. I didn't need to give them every detail, just enough to make them see the truth. The affair wasn't just a mistake or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate choice, a calculated move that she had made knowing the consequences. One of her best friends, Julie, was the first to confront her. I could see the way Karen squirmed when she realized that Julie knew the truth. She tried to lie, tried to convince Julie that it was all a misunderstanding, but it was too late. Her web of lies was starting to unravel. Slowly, but surely, Karen's support system was disappearing. The next step was to isolate her even further. I knew she would try to reach out to family members for support, but I had already planted seeds of doubt there as well. Karen's parents were supportive of her throughout our marriage, but I made sure they knew about the affair. I didn't have to tell them everything. A few subtle hints, a couple of pointed conversations with relatives, and they understood that Karen wasn't the person they thought she was. I wanted to make sure she didn't have a safe place to land, no easy way to escape the consequences of her actions. In the meantime, I kept up the facade of calm indifference. I didn't show anger. I didn't show pain. I didn't show anything. I let Karen feel the isolation that was beginning to close in on her. She had no one to turn to, no one to comfort her. She had destroyed the relationships she'd relied on for years, and now she was facing the fallout. Karen tried every trick in the book to get me back. She sent flowers, wrote letters, and even tried to talk to my friends. She reached out to people we both knew, asking them to convince me to forgive her. But I wasn't fooled by her act. I could see the desperation in her eyes. She had no idea how to fix what she had broken, no idea how to reverse the damage. She tried talking to the kids, pleading with them to get me to soften. She'd always been good at manipulating the people around her. But this time, it was different. I wasn't going to give in. The more she begged, the more I hardened my resolve. There was one thing Karen couldn't understand. I wasn't in this for the petty satisfaction of watching her grovel. No, I wanted her to understand the consequences of her betrayal. I wanted her to realize that everything she had built with me, everything that gave her comfort and security, was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Every day, she tried a new tactic. She suggested therapy, as if the words, "I'm sorry," could magically fix everything. She talked about the good times we had, the memories we built, trying to remind me of who we were before the betrayal. But I wasn't interested in her nostalgic pleas. That was the old Karen, the one who hadn't betrayed me. The woman standing before me now was someone I didn't recognize. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her to beg. I needed her to feel the consequences of her actions. And I wasn't going to stop until I made sure she did. At this point, Karen was starting to look like a woman who had lost everything. The phone calls, the flowers, the letters, none of it worked. It had been weeks since I had taken control of the financials, and she had no access to the resources she once took for granted. The isolation was starting to get to her. She didn't know where to turn anymore. She was alone, and I could see it was beginning to break her. But I wasn't done yet. I'd spent years building up my reputation and position in this town. I wasn't going to let her take everything and walk away unscathed. This was about much more than just the betrayal of a marriage. It was about revenge. And now I was ready to deliver the final blow. I had already isolated her socially, cut off her access to the financial safety net, and shown her the consequences of her choices. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to make sure that everyone knew who she really was. It wasn't enough for Karen to simply lose her place in my life. I wanted her to lose her standing in the community. People needed to understand that the woman they had known for years was not the person they thought she was. That's when I decided to expose the full extent of her betrayal. I had already made sure that a few key people knew about the affair: her best friend, a few of her colleagues, some of my family members. But now I was going to make it official. I was going to take her betrayal public, something that would be impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about tarnishing her reputation. It was about making sure she felt the full weight of what she had done, not just in our home, but in every aspect of her life. I reached out to a journalist I knew from a local paper. We had crossed paths on a few occasions, and I had always admired his sharp eye for detail. He owed me a favor, and I was cashing it in. We arranged a meeting, and I laid out the full story. I made sure he understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just some office affair or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated betrayal, and I wanted it to be exposed in its entirety. I handed over evidence, photos, messages, hotel receipts, everything I had been collecting in the weeks leading up to this. I wasn't just going to tell my side of the story. I was going to show it. Karen had no idea what was coming. She thought she could keep everything under wraps, that her secrets were safe. But that was before I set the wheels in motion. I didn't want to drag out the revelation. I wanted her to feel the humiliation and anger that came with being exposed publicly, and I wasn't going to let her avoid it. I knew that once the story hit the paper, it would be impossible to escape. And it wasn't just the affair I was exposing. It was everything: the lies, the manipulation, the cold disregard for the life we had built together. I wanted everyone to know that Karen wasn't some innocent bystander caught in a moment of weakness. No, she was the architect of her own destruction. As soon as the article hit the local paper, it spread like wildfire. Karen hadn't seen it coming. She thought she could keep her secrets hidden, but the truth always finds a way to surface. I could almost hear her panic when the first calls came in, when the first texts started flooding in. People she thought she could rely on, friends, colleagues, even neighbors, began distancing themselves from her. It was like watching a perfectly constructed house crumble to the ground. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages. Some people were supportive, but most were critical. They called her out for the affair, for her lies, for the destruction she had caused. The judgment was harsh, but it was well-deserved. Karen had always prided herself on being seen as the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect everything. But now her reputation was in tatters. Her colleagues at the hospital, where she had worked for years, were the first to make things difficult. Karen had always been well-liked, respected even, But after the article came out, things changed. Whispers started behind closed doors, and soon, the professional facade she had so carefully built came crashing down. Patients who had trusted her began to question her integrity. Her coworkers began to distance themselves. It wasn't long before she was called into the office for a performance review. Her supervisor, a woman who had been a mentor to her for years, told her that her behavior had become a distraction to the team. It wasn't just her work ethic. It was the trust that had been shattered. Karen was asked to take a leave of absence while they investigated her conduct. She didn't know how to handle it. She thought her job was secure, her career bulletproof. But now, everything was under threat. Her future in medicine was uncertain at best. I could see the frustration and helplessness in her eyes. She thought she could get away with this, that it wouldn't have consequences beyond our marriage. But she was wrong. It was just the beginning. Every part of her life that she had taken for granted was now under attack. As her world fell apart, Karen became more desperate. The constant calls, the pleading messages. She was trying to win me back, trying to convince me that she could change. It was pathetic. She tried to act like nothing had changed, like the person I had known for years was still there. She talked about how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything, and how much she wanted to make it right. But by then it was too late. I had already moved on, emotionally detached myself from the woman I once loved. She was a stranger now, a person who had shattered everything I thought we had. There was no going back, and as I listened to her beg, I could almost see the walls closing in around her. She was isolated, humiliated, and completely at my mercy. She tried to play the victim, as if I was the one being cruel by refusing to forgive her. But I wasn't fooled. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about the consequences of betrayal, and Karen was finally facing them head-on. I made sure not to give her any false hope. I didn't tell her things might improve or that there was a chance we could reconcile. There was no us anymore. She had destroyed that long ago. The only thing left now was for her to face the fallout of her own choices. I didn't know what Karen would do next, but I didn't care. This was the price she had to pay, and I would watch as she sank deeper into the consequences of her actions. There was no way out for her now. She had made her bed, and it was time for her to lie in it.